Hello, everyone, Bible believers around the world, and welcome to this mini bonus features lesson. So this lesson is going to be considered like bonus features that you used to get on those old DVDs for the lesson that we just released recently, exposing the false modern East Asians are Canaanites or Shemites doctrine. In that lesson, we exposed the truth that the modern East Asians are actually sons and daughters of Yefeth, just like the Europeans, and not Canaanites that moved or Shemitic peoples. Now, today's bonus feature lesson is titled, Is the Buddha Idol Really Depicting an African Man? Why are we covering this? So, one argument that people like to try and make is by using idols to determine what people's ancestors looked like. And we've covered this in the past in exposing that the Israelites, an Afro-Asiatic people, don't resemble the idol that was given to us, that being Jesus. Jesus is an idol in the so-called black community, but Jesus does not resemble the Israelites that worship him. Neither does Jesus actually resemble the truth of what the Messiah looked like. And the Messiah's name wasn't Jesus. We also talked about how this is the same case with Jacob's twin brother, Esau, because the Edomite goddess idol actually doesn't resemble the Edomite people. It resembles the Nabatean people who conquered the Edomites. All right? So it's been proven in history for a long time that the idol doesn't always represent what the people worshiping that idol actually looked like. And what people will try and do is try and use the Buddha idol as evidence of Hamitic African ancestors of the modern East Asian peoples. They'll say, see, they're worshiping Buddha, and Buddha was a black man. See, Buddha is, their African ancestors. They're Ham. It's their Hamitic ancestor, and they're worshiping him today. That's not true. We're going to get into this thing. Is the Buddha idol really depicting an African man? Is their God actually black? Is the false God that the East Asian branch of Yefeth is worshiping today actually a black man? And does it prove Canaan? Does it prove ancient Hamitic ancestors like people want to try and make it out to be? Let's get started. Is the Buddha idol really depicting an African man? Many people online claim the famous idol of the false god Buddha actually depicts Buddha as being an African man. And these same people compare the hair of the black woman to that of Buddha's. Furthermore, some individuals even try and use the Buddha idol as evidence that the modern East Asians are Hamitic. However, this isn't correct. Now, before we start exposing this false belief, I would like to read this note. It's worth noting that despite the idol's feminine appearance, it's actually male or not female. Many people probably already know that, but this whole time, I thought this false god was supposed to be depicting a woman, but it's actually a dude. I actually didn't know that. So for other people who didn't know that, there you go. Fact 1. Claiming Buddha represents ancient Hamitic ancestors of modern East Asians is completely wrong, because Buddha isn't even from East Asia. Buddhism originated in India, and modern East Asians have just adopted the religion. Furthermore, even if Buddha were black, it doesn't prove that modern East Asians are Hamitic, because the ancient black Asian populations are a completely different ethnic stock than the ones you see today in K-pop and in world governments, who migrated into Asia from Eurasia centuries after the black Asians were already there. Yet we covered that in the biblical origins of the modern East Asians lesson that we did recently, that the modern East Asians that you'd be seeing, dancing to K-pop and in these K-dramas and in governments are not the same people as the ancient indigenous black Asians, like the people pushing this false Canaanite Hamitic doctrine want you to believe. All right. So even if Buddha was one of these ancient black Asians, the modern Asians aren't even of the same ethnic stock as the ancient black Asians. The ancient black Asians were there thousands of years before the Han Chinese and the other modern East Asian peoples were even established, before they even arrived. All right? They're completely different people. The modern East Asians, as we've covered, are sons and daughters of Yefeth, who migrated from Eurasia to East Asia thousands of years after these black people were already there. All right? So it wouldn't prove that. Let's keep going to fact 2. Historically, many groups of people have worshipped gods who look nothing like them. One great example is how Israelites, Afro-Asiatic people, received Jesus from the Europeans, aka Yefeth, who is a whitewashed version of the Messiah, whose real name isn't Jesus. Not only does Jesus not resemble the Israelites, but he doesn't match the actual appearance of the true Messiah either. The same thing happened to Jacob's brother Esau, because the idol that the Edomites worshipped didn't resemble them, but instead resembled the Nabateans who conquered them. We covered that before. This is all to say that assuming people's ancestors actually looked like their false gods isn't correct. Exactly. So not only is Buddha not even from East Asia, East Asians just adopted the religion. Not only that, but the ancient black Asians that Buddha could have been were of a completely different ethnic stock than the modern East Asians, like I said, that you'd be seeing today. And third, it's inaccurate to assume that people's ancestors always looked like the false gods that they worship, because we know historically that has not been the case. All right. Now let's get to fact 3, because this whole thing is based on, for the most part, the tight coiled hair of Buddha. Because people be like, see, you got the hair, got Afro hair. This is a black man. But let's see, what are these tight coils actually? Are they actually Hamitic or Shemitic hair? Is that what this trying to replicate, or is it something else? Fact 3. The tight ringlets on Buddha's head are not meant to represent Afro-textured hair according to Buddhists, as some say they are snail shells, and others say he shaved his head and the remaining hair turned into tight ringlets. So according to the people who practice the false religion, the ringlets on top of Buddha's head are not Hamitic or Shemitic hair, but are actually snail shells that moved onto his head to protect him from the elements while meditating. That's what the folklore says. Where others say that he shaved his head and the remaining hair coiled up. So Buddha was not depicted, according to the people who worship this false god, to have hair that specifically is trying to look like Shemitic and Hamitic peoples. All right? And as we've already established, even if it was, Buddha would not be the same people as the modern East Asians. We already showed that in the main lesson. This is just bonus features now. This is just bonus features. And one thing that's very interesting about more modern Buddha illustrations is really the only feature on the idol that could be linked to Shemitic and Hamitic peoples is the hair. Because most of the more modern ones in the past couple hundred years have the Eurocentric, narrow nose, small lips, and the skull shape is not Negroid looking. All right? And obviously nobody has ears that big, so that's fictional. All right? But one thing I would like to say before we close off is that more ancient illustrations of Buddha have shown wide noses and thicker lips. And some people have even made the theory that Buddhism was not created by Hamites or Yefethites at all, but was actually created by scattered Israelites into India. Because India, as we've mentioned before, was a melting pot and still is. In ancient India, you had the indigenous Hamites who were there, so-called black people. And then you had scattered Israelites, descendants of Shem, Afro-Asiatic peoples, also considered so-called black people who were there. And then you have the Aryan invasion, who were the Japhethites who moved in, who are the majority of the population now, who carry the Eurocentric haplogroup R. So you have a lot of people right there in that area that this idol could be trying to represent. Now, the Buddhists themselves say that Buddha himself was an Aryan man. That's what they say. But then some try and argue that Aryan did not refer to what it refers to now. Aryan now is used to refer to the Eurocentric Japhetic Indians that are in the land, and they claim that Aryan didn't mean that back then. So there's a lot of confusion with this false religion. But what we do know for sure is that the Buddha idol is not proof that the modern East Asians are Canaanites. They're not Canaanites, and they're not Shemites. The modern East Asians are descendants of Japheth, who are completely different ethnic stock than the ancient black people who lived in their country before them. Countries before them. Bye for now.